Shabbat Shalom, everyone. You may be seated. A handful of weeks ago, our family went to Europe to meet our daughter, who's studying for the year in Israel. She met us in Europe also, and we got to spend winter break together. And it was our first time really spending time with our daughter, who's now 18 and a half years old, in a place where she is legally allowed to drink alcohol. In America, it's 21, and we won't buy her alcohol at a restaurant or any other place because the rule of the law of the land is the law. But when we were in Poland and Germany, we allowed her to have a glass of wine or perhaps even two with us because it's the law, and she's 18 and she was with us, and of course no one was driving. So we felt that it was appropriate, and you can all save your judgments on our parenting for later. So our daughter is sitting at dinner with us on our second or third night in Europe. She had 2 glasses of wine. She's very much a lightweight and very dramatic in addition. And she gets a little tipsy or buzzed. And she says, Dad, I have to tell you so. I have to confess. I got to confess something to you. I said, what is it, Eve? She goes, I have to confess it, but don't be mad. Okay, I thought she was going to tell me that she had a non-Jewish boyfriend. I thought she was going to tell me that she's been taking money out of my wallet when she was a kid. I thought she was going to tell me that she cheated on the SATs. That's how she did so well. Like, what is she going to tell me? Don't be mad, Dad. Okay, Evie, what are you going to tell me? Dad, all of your sermons sound the same. She goes, oh, I feel so much better. She's a very funny kid, and I could not stop laughing because it wasn't what I was expecting her to say. Of course, I understood it, and we all had a good chuckle out of it. We went to bed that night, and at 3 o'clock in the morning in a hotel, I roll over, Dory's sound asleep, snoring away, and I push her. And she wakes up, she goes, what's wrong? I said, honey, are you up? She goes, I am now. I said, do all my sermons really sound the same? And she rolled her eyes and then rolled over and went to bed. Why is it that sometimes when we hear things that we don't necessarily want to hear, it lands in a way, even when it comes from people who we love, that makes us feel uneasy or insecure or unhappy? And why do we work so hard to surround ourselves with things that we want to hear? In the world we live in today, which was different than the world in which I grew up in, we can just dial into whatever channel we want that will tell us the news that we want to hear. And that is the reality. I don't care what side of the aisle you're on, but for that side of the aisle, even those in the center, there's a specific channel for you. Maybe it's Fox, maybe it's CNN, maybe it's OAN. There's a channel for you. Well, if you're not a TV watcher, there's a paper for you. Maybe it's the Wall Street Journal. Maybe it's the Post. Maybe it's the New York Times. But we often turn to read the things that we want to hear. And occasionally, when things come in our direction that we don't want to hear, we vilify it and its source. I share that this week in that story from Eve in particular, because there is something that happens in a bibliodramatic way, a psychodramatic way, that we often don't take time unpacking. And that is how Moses and Pharaoh both digest hearing something they don't want to hear. When Moses is chosen by God from a voice within the burning bush, Moses really doesn't want the job. He doesn't want to be the spokesperson for the Israelite people. A, because he's not a good spokesperson, and B, because he doesn't want to do it. That's not what he looks to do. And God tells him, you got to do this. And it's not satisfying for him. It's not the answer he wants. And when he pushes back on God, you would expect God to say, okay, you don't want to do it, I'll get someone else. But that's not what God does or says. God continues to push Moses until he is forced to give an answer that is not his inclination. In essence, he has to say no to something that he really wants to say yes to, or even the inverse. And now let's look at Pharaoh for a minute. Pharaoh is a person who surrounds himself with people who will adorn him and give him all the answers he wants. No different than any monarchy today. Pharaoh is not used to hearing something that he doesn't want to hear. And if he does, he knows how to handle it. But meanwhile, someone now comes up to Pharaoh, someone with a little bit of schlep in his community because he's technically his son, because he's been raised by his daughter, the princess. And this person says to Pharaoh, "Let my people go." It's a demand that not only does he not want to give into, he won't give into. And now he's faced with the response where he has to say no. And again, Moses has to hear an answer that he wasn't prepared to hear. All of this to tell us that sometimes in life, we have to go through these places that tell us the things we don't want to hear, as opposed to the things that we want to hear. I said to my kid not long ago when talking about someone else who gave us advice that we didn't like, said there are two kinds of people in the world. The people who tell us what we want to hear, and then the people who tell us what we need to hear. The people who tell us what we want to hear make us feel good, and we always stand near them because it's comforting, and we know they have our back. But the people who tell us what we need to hear doesn't always feel good. Sometimes it does, but often it doesn't. And often there can be friction, a rub, tension, in hearing that which we don't want to hear but need to hear, and how it is that we absorb it and digest it. In today's world, we have a concept called an echo chamber. An echo chamber is this idea that we surround ourselves with people who are like-minded and who think and say similar things. And we don't particularly like to be around people who say things that are in wild contradiction or even mild contradiction. That we put ourselves in these echo chambers so that we can hear and feel the things that feel most comfortable for us. That's why we subscribe to these particular channels. That's why we subscribe to these particular newspapers or go to these particular activities or join these social groups, because we'll know we'll be with like-minded people. Now, of course, we should do that because, for example, as a Jewish people, we should congregate together. But it doesn't mean that we can't congregate with non-Jews. Of course, if we're Democrats, we should congregate with other Democrats, and Republicans should congregate with other Republicans. But it doesn't mean that we can't include in conversation a Republican to a Democrat conversation or a Democrat to a Republican conversation. In fact, that is more necessary than ever, but the echo chambers that we have created have also been force fields that deny those people a sense of voice and a right to be heard. I don't know if you knew this, but it is said today that 61% of millennials, that's a pretty big number, get their news and information off of social media. That doesn't mean CNN.com. It means social media. That means TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, Snapchat, that these places distill information for them for news, and that's where they get their news. Well, you might say, what's so wrong about that? Everyone has a different outlet for getting their news. There's nothing wrong with that, except that social media like Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, Snapchat works in algorithms. And it determines by these algorithms things that you like and things that you don't like, simply by what you like and what you don't like. When you give a heart or a thumbs up or an appreciation to particular pages or things or advertisements in any of these groups, they decode through these algorithms what your preferences would be. Now, some obviously can be off, but for the most part, they get it right. And that means that 61% of millennials are getting the news that the algorithm believes they want to hear and read. Not necessarily all of the news that's fit to print, if you will, or all of the news that they could be hearing and listening to. What does that do to our society when we stop hearing that which we need to hear, as opposed to only that which we want to hear? Maybe one of the most important lessons in all of the Torah is gleaned this week with Moses and Pharaoh, who are both on opposite sides of the field and both demanded to hear something that they not only don't want to hear, but that they need to hear. Sometimes all of us need to hear a voice that calls us to rise to a moment or occasion, even if we're tired or fatigued or not really ready to step into that breach. And sometimes all of us need to hear the answer no, when we so often wish we could hear the answer yes. As the rabbi, I play a game similar to my kids that I played with my parents sometimes. My kids know when they want something, they know exactly which parent to go to get the answer they want. So for example, when my almost 16-year-old wants to practice driving, he knows I'm the guy. I'll take him to practice driving, much more than my wife, who's a little anxious when he drives. But he also knows that if he wants to get a Slurpee loaded with sugar and junk for his teeth and some candy to go with it, that there's no chance I'm buying that for him, but that my wife will. So I can count on one finger how many times he's asked me for a Slurpee and candy, but I can count on hands and toes how many times he's asked me to practice driving. And you can flip that around for the same thing that he's done with Dory for getting candy versus driving. Why? Because we know that we want to go to the place where we hear what we want to hear. And in most cases, we want to hear a yes. But how often is it critical for us to hear that no? I might do that in my rabbinate and knowing the questions that I'd ask of leadership to get the answer that I want. But all of us do that. You think attorneys at firms don't go up to managing partners and a particular managing partner to get the answer that they want? Or the same thing for doctors going to other physicians to get the answer that they want? But how much more valuable can it be to get the answer that you need as opposed to the answer that you want? One of the major problems happening societally today that has led to fantastic division and is drawing us further and further apart is our inability to hear things we don't want to hear. If I have a passionate view about Israel, about reproductive rights, about healthcare, about global warming, about the future of the Jewish world, I often don't create space, and other people don't either, for listening to a dissenting opinion. But it's through that give and take, that shakel v'tarya, as it's written in Aramaic, that we really learn to grow. And it's through those places of discomfort and unease and getting the answer that we need to hear versus that we want to hear that allows us to get out of our comfort zone. Truth is, I'm not so sure that this sermon sounds so different than any of my other sermons for all of you. But that piece of information, that counsel, that moment of her stupor that allowed her to speak something that was on her mind, is an important thing for me to hear, to grow from. And what was quite obvious in that sentence from my daughter was not whether or not she loved me or cared for me or respected me, but rather something she could give me feedback on that I could grow from. And not feedback about how wonderful I am or how generous I am or how great a dad I am, but feedback that might sting, but that helps in the process of correction. And so too with Moses and with Pharaoh. All of us can look to get out of our comfort zone. By hearing another opinion doesn't mean we're necessarily indoctrinated to it. By appreciating a different point of view, it might help us garner a sense of empathy or compassion or understanding. And most importantly, it grows in our tolerance. It doesn't mean we have to change our passionate views. It doesn't mean my views on Israel or reproductive rights or global warming has to move significantly or at all. But it does mean I can appreciate where another soul is coming from and to grow from those corrective moments. May all of us tune in our ears and put our places in spaces, put our bodies in an orbit where we can hear what we need to hear, not just what we want to hear. And may that help us grow in our journey of life. Shabbat Shalom, everyone.